You're good to go, Eugene. We're
Okay.
recording.
Okay, so tonight I'm going to follow on from what Dr. Kevin Lynch did on Monday night, which was introduce the concept of nature-based solutions. And so I'm going to focus in on nature-based solutions working on the coast. Specifically, I was asked to aim this at communities who may want to mobilize and start doing these interventions, and local authorities who are tasked with managing them. And so I want to start off with a photograph I saw in a book. Well, I saw on Twitter first, but then quickly purchased the book, because this is a picture taken in 1965 in Inisheer, the smallest of the Aran Islands, of a photographer who went there and happen chance came across a funeral, and the whole book is about this funeral on an island funeral. But if you look in the middle foreground there, you'll see an area that's planted, and this really caught my eye, and I followed up in the book, and I basically realized quickly this is a Marum grass patch. And so I just 55 years ago, the Aran Islanders were planting Marum, which is a nature-based solution. And so it's something we have to think about when we talk about nature-based solutions, which is not a new, the practice is not new. The concept of nature-based solutions is new, and you'll hear a lot of me talking today about ecosystems, and we need to manage ecosystems. And I just want to give you a quick definition there. We're talking about how the non-living and living parts combine, and they interact to form a system that we hope is a symbiotic relationship, a functioning relationship. And then we have terms like nature-based solutions, which I'll be focusing on tonight, and related terms like ecosystem, goods and services. And these are new terms, but they actually address approaches that have been going on historically. And we have to think about coastal communities. They've been building resilience, and they have been resilient for generations. And so all the new policy and climate policy coming down from above is it's just repackaging and maybe hopefully operationalizing ways to manage the coast. So let's quickly get to nature-based solutions, and it behooves me, of course, I should absolutely define what it is a nature-based solution is, and you don't have to look too far. A good approach here is by the European Commission definition, which is solutions that are inspired and supported by nature. They're cost-effective and simultaneously provide environmental, social, and economic benefits, and they help build resilience. So that's a nice definition of nature-based solutions. They also go on, this is based on a policy report, and they say there's 5 questions you can ask yourself. And if the answer to them is yes, then what you're dealing with is a nature-based solution. The 5 questions are there on the right. Does it use nature or natural processes, your management intervention? Does it provide or improve social benefits or economic benefits or environmental benefits? And does it have a net benefit for biodiversity? So you can see there's a lot involved here in terms of these approaches, and this is what makes them attractive, and this is why they could be the key to unlocking how we manage the coastline for the next decades or century. Those of you who are familiar with nature-based solutions already, well, you'll recognize on the bottom there some of the ones we apply to coasts, which are the coastal dunes. You also have the marine nature-based solutions, which would be coral reefs, but you also have things like coastal wetlands. And then you also have solutions in peatlands and forests and other areas. So now, before I get into the case studies, I did want to set some baseline information to everyone. And I feel this is important too, because as we start to dismantle the issues with the coastline in Ireland, it's not just about nature-based solutions. They're a small cog in this big machine governments and of the land, and we need to understand those parts in order to understand how we can actually make nature-based solutions successful. So the first issue is we should always be thinking of the long game. We have short-term needs, which is the summer 2021, but as we actually sit down and make plans and management strategies, we have to be thinking about 2050 and 2100 and what that means. And the climate conditions, the boundary conditions are changing. For coastal communities and coastal urban cities in Ireland, we're dealing with a very different sea level. Sea level is rising. There's absolutely no doubt about that. The intensity of storms and extreme events is increasing, and subsequently you're going to have increased rates of coastal erosion or flood inundation, increasing hazards, and this will be the new norm essentially. So we have to learn to adapt to that, because I don't think we're in a position where we can actually defend it using conventional engineering methods. One way of putting that is I don't think we can engineer a way out of this, or eco-engineer a way out of this, because no matter what we do, I think we have to face the reality that some places we won't be able to defend or protect in a way that they might like. And so it's like the big elephant in the room. I could give you the best talk in nature-based solutions and away you go, but in some locations, again, there's everything I talk about tonight, site specificity is important. Every site has its own traits, and so what's good for one site might not apply for another site. The second issue I want to talk about is you've all those ocean pressures coming from sea level and from storms. You also have these pressures coming from the landward side and people coming to the coast, visitors and users. And in the Project Ireland was released like 2 years ago, now 3 years ago at this stage, and they have census data in there, predictions in there that says the population of Ireland will be nearly 6 million by 2040, an extra million people in the country. So that's going to bring extra pressures on the coast, and this is a real worry right now for coastal communities up and down the west coast and the east coast, and all around, just going on my interactions of late. And the government's doing a fantastic job via Fáilte Ireland of selling our coastline. I mean, what better way? They put up some signs and called it the Wide Atlantic Way, and they invested 140 million the last count just to promote this, and they're going to bring an extra 1.1 million visitors to these 9 counties on the western seaboard. That's all fantastic, but there is a big issue here in terms of what do they expect those communities, and who's going to host these visitors, and what amenities are we going to provide? So I'm happy to back this statement up, because as the years have gone on, I arrived in 2013 in Galway. As the years have gone on, I've come to realize that something I came across recently, called a principled incompetence, is happening with the big G, the big government. So it's definitely not for lack of means or motivation or ability, because we see it coming out in the climate policy being developed, and it's very exciting. And I've been hosted tonight by the CARO, the Climate Action Regional Office. This is very exciting. But when push comes to shove, I'll show you some evidence of this. I don't see any change of structure that's needed if we're to take this seriously. And so I feel somewhat, I guess it depends on the day you find me. Some days I'm really optimistic, and other days I feel like it's just bang your heads against the wall, which I don't see the transformative radical changes that we need happening, and it's impacting us. Why do I say that? This is a good example. I hope you can see this. This is basically a timeline of all the important policy related to coast and climate in Ireland. And I guess the important one I want to mention is 2015 was the Climate Act. And from 2015, from that Climate Act came the National Mitigation Plan and the National Adaptation Framework. And this week, a couple of days ago, the climate bill was signed to reduce emissions by 51% by the end of the decade. And we're going to be net zero carbon emitters by 2050. And this is all fantastic, but that's all dealing with mitigation of emissions. A big part of the climate policy that we've developed over the last couple of years is national adaptation to new climate conditions. And from this national adaptation framework came the local authorities had to build adaptation strategies, and a lot of them looked the same. And they all hit the big words of what's needed, and local authorities were going to do this, and they're going to deal with communities, and they're going to deal with stakeholders, and they're going to provide all the tools to adapt. But the issue I have is there's nothing yet in any of the policy to operationalize it. There's no mechanisms of how we're going to actually help people on the ground. They haven't engaged, to my knowledge, of any coastal communities, and there's certainly no money there right now for coastal communities. There's nothing being ring-fenced for coastal communities, and it's going at a rate that's really slow. If it continues, we're going to be in big trouble in 10 years' time. The glimmer of hope I have is two things. The local authorities can't do this on their own. Everything I present today depends on local authority support. Everything, every case study I present for Ireland depends on local authority support. Local authorities are stretched. I work with them, and they do a fantastic job, but they can't keep doing it. The Climate Action Regional Offices will hopefully help them and help centralize some of their expertise and share the workloads of them. But a lot more needs to be done to build capacity. And there's been EPA reports done on this in terms of how do we operationalize national adaptation. Well, you have to build capacity within local authorities. The CAROs is the first step, but ultimately there has to be more resources and more expertise brought into the local authorities. The second glimmer of hope I have is last September, an interdepartmental committee was formed in Dublin, which made me nervous because it's the national coast. They have to, it's their job, their objective is to build a whole of Ireland national coastal change strategy. Now this committee is made up of all the departments, housing and planning, OPW is also in there, agricultural, food and marine, culture, heritage and Gaeltacht, and communications, climate action and environment. All the departments are there. And then they also have a subcommittee which is made up of the agencies who deal with the data, the scientific evidence, the data. They're the OPWs as well, EPA, Geological Survey of Ireland, Marine Institute and Med Éireann. So if they come up, well, they're meant to report back after 6 months, and the 6 months has passed. My issue there is I don't think that this committee truly knows the real coast of Ireland. And we can talk about that after. The real coast of Ireland doesn't happen in committees in Dublin. And I highly recommend that they maybe connect down to the ground and to the people who actually work in the coast. The last big point, well, the second last big point I want to make before we actually go into the case studies is we're certainly not doing a good job right now of conserving or protecting our coastal habitats. In fact, any habitats in Ireland. And so there's a real need for structural change. I mean, I know of some colleagues, and I've worked with some people in the National Parks Wildlife Service, NPWS, who are charged with doing this for us because by law we have to, but under the EU directives, every 6 years we report to the EU the condition of our habitats. And you can see here the overall assessment from 2007 to 2013 is 91% of our habitats were either inadequate or bad in terms of their assessment. Now you could actually bring that down, and that's the pie chart on the left. And then if you actually go down to the coastal dune habitats, for example, overall, no coastal dune habitat was in favorable condition, and 2 of them were actually in really bad condition, and the rest were just unfavorable. So there's something seriously wrong with the way we're managing our landscape. And so there's a public consultation open right now in terms of what we do. MPWS, I have some ideas on that. I'm sure everyone has their own ideas, but I think it wouldn't hurt us to look at maybe removing MPWS away from the government. They're inserted right now in the Department of Housing and Planning and Local Government. Maybe made them semi-autonomous, sort of like the EPA. But right now, they're certainly not doing a good job. And the final one is, and this is one I think is really important, that every coastal community who tunes in tonight and every local authority who tunes in tonight really needs to understand the numbers of what the value of the coastline is. Now, this in itself is a very hard thing. How do we actually calculate the value of a landscape? Well, there's actually international best practice, and it's basically under the umbrella of ecosystem goods and services, and it's called the Millennium Assessment. And basically, you look at any landscape or any system, in this case, a dune system, and you look at the services, the goods and services it supplies, provisioning, regulating, cultural, or supporting. Now, a dune, for example, has regulating services such as erosion or flood regulation, has supporting services such as provision of habitat, and cultural services, whether it's recreation or aesthetics or spiritual values. Now, it is really difficult to put numbers. I mean, trying to put an evaluation on this is really, really difficult. It's not like you can do market values like you can do for land, for property, for commercial residential property. There's no such thing as a market value for your spiritual value of the coast, but we have to start somewhere. And so I want to bring your attention to reports which are important. The first is published by colleagues of mine in NUIG Galway in the marine research unit there, and they did a report for the EPA on valuing Ireland's coastal marine and estuarine ecosystem services. Now, it's too complicated and it's actually not really important in terms of how they got their numbers, but and they actually said not to add up the numbers, but I did because they came from different models and different approaches. But it does identify the potential value of the natural capital of the coast, and it also shows a knowledge gap because this is really incomplete. This is the first step towards, I think, more iterations. And so Ireland, the ecosystem values, they had at least 3.58 billion per year for some of these, the coastal marine and estuarine ecosystem services. If you go down to the one below the line, this is the UK, and they did a study UK-wide on coastal margins, and they looked at things like the ecosystem value of sand dunes, macaire, shingle, lagoons, salt marshes, and they came up with a formula that worked for them, which is 3.46% of their GNI. They just found out an estimate that the coastal margins are worth 48 billion pounds per year to the UK. But I again, unscientifically, but just to show the potential value and the knowledge gap that is there, I use their methodology in their report, and for Ireland equivalent is 2.57 billion per year, the coastal ecosystems. So the take-home message here is the coastal systems are worth a lot of money. They have a natural value. They're a natural asset, and we don't treat them like an asset. They're not, and nor do we invest in them proportionally the way I believe we should be. So let's switch gears into why we're all here tonight, which is nature-based solutions. And I want to start off with showing you examples of the large scale, I think the Dutch wrote the book on how to manage the landscape, and that's for very valid reasons. They're a high risk location, and they've experienced heavy losses from storms, and so they're not in a position to not take it seriously. And so this is just like an idea of the large scale. They're famous for the sand motor, which is a massive nourishment, and also for building huge dune systems. These are artificial systems in terms of they're nourished. And they're also, you can see a transition from a kind of a resistance approach using seawalls and in this case groins, that they're converting more towards just more of a nature-based solution, which is build a large coastal system that acts as such. A bit smaller scale, but equally impactful. There's a famous, well, it's very well known. It's Medbury in the south of England. They did a managed realignment of their coast. You can see here, essentially they allowed this whole area to flood. They bulldozed the barrier here, and this whole area now is allowed to flood. Instead of years of protecting it, they realized it was long-term, it wasn't sustainable. And so what they did was they created a whole new wetland environment. So there's multiple benefits to this. First of all, the world's wetlands, you can see I have some basic information there. The world's wetlands are disappearing faster than they should be. But when you've wetlands that disappear, what you're doing is you're threatening species. There's more likely to be flooding because wetlands can act as a sponge or a buffer for these flood waters. And also they contain a lot of the carbon dioxide. So this project, actually, I'd highly recommend if you go to CCAT website. It's Coastal Communities Adapting Together project, which is a fantastic example of coastal communities working to make change. You can actually see this presentation, Medbury. And then even smaller scale is you can do small scale interventions such as this here, which is dune planting on this blowout here. So here you have a bare sand blowout along a 4 dune section, and 5 years later you can see during a storm it's fully vegetated, and the grass, the Marum grass, is pretty dense. And so this is just a small scale approach, and depending on your resources, of course, and also depending on the support you have from government, you can go large, very large, like the Dutch. You could go large like the UK. Or in Ireland, there's no appetite for that I've seen. So in nature-based solutions in Ireland are all at the scale of local impacts, local interventions at this scale. That doesn't mean they're not impactful, because this is an example of which I'll be talking about later today, which is, this is a 2016 blowout, and you can see the whole dune line is blown away. This is the road, and this is the Maharees in the Dingle Peninsula, north side of the Dingle Peninsula, and this is used as a car park essentially. But look at it in 2019, and more recently, August 20, I got this photograph from them. You can see that blowout is essentially filled in, and now there's a controlled path. The small interventions over time, and it doesn't take massive investment, can work. And that's what I want to share with you today. Now, I do want to emphasize, it comes with a heavy price. It comes with a very, very heavy price of volunteer hours and commitment, and them banging their heads against the wall, trying to get any bit of intervention or support from local authorities who basically don't have the funds or don't have a well, they do have appetite, and they've shown themselves to have appetite. They don't have a policy, and they don't have a management plan that would actually support these kind of interventions. Okay. So I'm going to first of all talk about for Ireland, some ocean-based nature-based solutions, and the three options are kelp beds, oyster beds, and seagrass meadows. Last summer, I did an article with a fantastic MSc master's student in our coastal marine environments master's program in NUIG Galway, Miss Emily Rick, and we did an article for Ocean Focus, and we basically did a literature desktop study and assessed, is kelp an option as a nature-based solution for coastal protection for Ireland? There's no answer to that other than no one. We don't know, but there's people studying this in Galway, in NUI Galway, and there's people studying around the world, and there is evidence that it would work. Now, why would we even go there? Well, if you eco-engineer a large kelp beds, then the benefits are, there's commercial benefits, there's recreational benefits, there's environmental benefits, there's cultural and societal benefits. It ticks all the boxes as a nature-based solution. One of the things I have to emphasize tonight is there's a lot of uncertainty with nature-based solutions. And so that's something we have to embrace. I mean, politicians don't like it, and certainly the bean counters investing money don't like to hear the term uncertainty, but that's the nature of the beast. I can talk, if I want, I could talk about a numerical model in Australia that says kelp can reduce coastal erosion by 90% during simulated storms. And that's a valid study, but it's a numerical study, which means it's not really based on empirical observations. And so the jury is still out. Now, if you look at the evidence though, Ireland, we are situated in the Northeast Atlantic, and we have potential to grow kelp beds in towards the shallow water. And it is something, again, it's our job is actually identifying where these knowledge gaps are and where we can actually investigate, because this is huge potential down the line. Something I'm not familiar with, and I won't pretend to be familiar with, is oyster beds in Ireland. Ken O'Sullivan gave the Deep Atlantic filmmaker, legend in Kerry and Clare. He did a presentation in Kerry 2 years ago, I think, at this stage, and he talked about the oyster beds in Fiannet in Tralee Bay and how historically they've declined. Well, if that's the case, well, we can flip this around and say, okay, if oyster beds can thrive in Ireland, why not actually start investing in them? Because, excuse me, for a couple of main reasons. First of all, oyster beds are a keystone species, which means they have proportionally much larger value to the coastal marine ecosystems and all other species. And second of all, and this has been studied and been proven in lots of places worldwide, corals reduce the wave energy and wave height. And so, I mean, again, this is all site specific, but I could throw numbers out there like 97% average wave energy reduction, but every location is different, but it's significant. Reefs can dissipate wave energy. And so now imagine if we have the potential to build oyster beds, or it can at least help us in our battle. And the other one is Seagrass Medals. Again, I'm a coastal geomorphologist. I'm a geographer. I've colleagues in NUIG Galway who study these. I certainly don't, but I'm interested in their application, and is this potential as and their potential as to slow down the flow, to, in this case, you can see increased sedimentation and limited erosion. Excuse me. But again, this is something we need to investigate and commit to investigating, commit funds to investigate this. We have the expertise worldwide. There's something interesting that's related to the kelp, which is when kelp basically dies, it gets washed up on the coast, and whether you want to call it, technically, I think the term I like to use is driftweed, but think about it as the rack line on the beach, seaweed on the beach after a storm gets washed up. And I have no issues with that, but lots of people do. And in the same Ocean Focus article I did with Emily, we talked about this driftweed dilemma. And as we were writing this article last summer, I was informed of a local initiative, local to Galway. I don't live in Barna, but Barna, which is just outside Galway, the Barna community had a GoFundMe initiative, and they raised 6,000 euros to remove the seaweed off the beach. And the reasons they listed on their GoFundMe account was it's full of flies, this decaying seaweed is full of flies, it emits bad odors, affects our village and the enjoyment of our coastal area, and it's not safe. And that's fine, but we have to also consider the other side of this, which is the benefits gained from this rack line that is decaying, but it's full of nutrients and it's an otherwise sterile beach. It also initiates the development of embryo dunes, which potentially can raise the elevation of the beach. And these dunes are also act as a sand reservoir during storms. So Galway, we have the same thing, Galway City. This is Grattan Beach. And I was just interested in this when I first arrived in Galway. People are telling me how Grattan was always being cleaned. It's one of the few city beaches we have. And so this is just an example. Anytime there's seaweed on the beach, the council phones basically start hopping. And so you can see it goes into the media and they get accused of not doing their job. But I guess our job as coastal geomorphologists, coastal scientists, and looking at coastal interventions is look at the other side of this. This is Grattan Beach taken by Dr. Kevin Lynch. I'm not sure what the date is, but you can see this is the back four dune, but these are all embryo dunes, we call them. And you can see if you look in here, they're clumps of, they're not marram grass. Marram is at the back. These are more salt tolerant species. They can be, the high tide come in and inundate them and they're not impacted. And so you can see they also can join up to create a dune system. And you can see they raise the sand because they trap sand. And then when the council comes in and does their cleaning, you can see the issue here, that they not just scrape their sea rack, they scrape all the embryo dunes with them, and you're left with this barren shoreline. So when we talk about impacts, our interventions on the coast, and nature-based solutions is something new, and the conventional approaches will always be there in terms of the engineering grey infrastructure. We have to think about our relationship with the environment. And so me as a father with a couple of young children, I do want safe, clean beaches and coastlines, and maintain paths. And I do want familiarity and access. The coastal scientist in me actually prefers the natural optimums, which is the term beach litter is rack. It's not that it doesn't mean plastics. It means natural debris on the beach. You have natural cross-source zonation, you sediments, and you have a system that's allowed to act naturally. The problem is there's conflicts between these, and we have to kind of decide where do we want to set our stall, or combinations thereof. The big question down the line is, can we coexist with landforms? Are we going to dominate them? We've tried that in the past via engineering, and it hasn't worked. It's not going to work. It's going to cost too much money. So what we do, maybe there's something in between nature-based solutions with other options, but ultimately we have to accept that a lot of our systems aren't going to be natural anymore. They're not fully natural. The human footprint is omnipresent, and the human actions are going to be a first order control in these systems. And depending on the locations, there's going to be different. It's going to be value laden. We're going to, different communities, different local authorities will have different opinions at different sites. And one way to look at this then is we have to do it strategically, and you work with stakeholders and communities and figure out what the targets are and come up with compatible management options. And then education and awareness is incredibly important. I also want to bring to your attention the fact that sometimes decisions can be, planning decisions can be as good as nature-based decisions, and so solutions, I should say. And so this is an example in Galway of a drumlin that's eroding, and this is Silver Strand Beach. And one of the options for Galway City Council was to build a walkway, an armoured walkway, to protect these eroding drumlins, protect this field. But the issue there is it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a coastal scientist to figure out that all the sediment from this drumlin feeds this Rusheen Bay, which is a special area conservation, a special protected area. It would be a really bad decision. The social benefits and recreational benefits of a walkway extending from Salt Hill to Silver Strand would be absolutely brilliant. But ultimately, you're compromising the health of an estuary by doing so. Okay. So I want to talk about land-based, nature-based solutions right now, and I just want to play this video for you. I'm going to flip to David. Give me the thumbs up if you can hear this, okay?
Grounded, connected. Dunes were flattened, but the towns they protected suffered less damage. Now, as communities rebuild, NPR presents 2 Ways to Make a Dune. The first recipe is a classic, friends. All you'll need is sand, water, wind, and a dash of beach grass. Start with a regular beach and add a little wind. The faster gusts will pick up grains of sand and start to pile them up. Now, throw in the beach grass. It will slow the wind so it drops in sand. Dunes will begin to form, and the grass will keep growing, creating a mesh that helps prevent erosion. Salty waves will kill the grass closest to the water, so you'll have a stretch of empty beach and, where the grass survives, a line of dunes. That empty beach is important, though. It supplies sand and maintains the dune. The wider the beach, the bigger they will become, and the better they can protect the land beyond them. Every now and then, as sea levels rise, a major storm will flatten the dunes and push the entire beach inland. But don't worry, the dune will grow back in a dozen years or so. But hold on, what if there are buildings where these new dunes want to grow? What if you want the dunes back where they can protect those buildings? Well, friends, try the second recipe, the one used by many folks today. You'll need a few extra ingredients, some heavy equipment, a few additives, and a large serving of cash. First, push all that sand back down the beach. Of course, left alone, those piles would quickly erode, so you'll want to build them around a foundation. Discarded Christmas trees work well. Then add some old snow fences to keep pedestrians away and trap the sand, and plant some grass on top. Of course, with a shortened beach, there won't be enough sand to maintain your dunes, so you'll want to dredge sand from the ocean floor and rebuild your beach. Of course, any shoreline that sticks out into the ocean will be washed away, so you'll want to build up the beach in both directions. Now you have a working dune. Each time a major storm passes through, simply repeat. It will cost a lot of money. It will take a lot of labor. And as sea levels rise and the beach erodes, these dunes will become more and more fragile. But at least you won't have to move. Mother Nature's recipe is much easier. Just sit back and relax for a decade or two. And of course, you'll need to move that house.
So that's a really, in a couple of minutes, they've really given you a good insight into what's required for nature-based solutions for dunes. In Ireland, we have plenty of sand, water, wind, and grass. What we don't have is money, and so the man-made dune option in Ireland, which is done basically worldwide, I've come across them in all my travels. It's not an option at the moment, but it should be in Ireland in terms of a nature-based solution. One thing I want to hit home is the natural way. You have to be patient with nature-based solutions. Part of the uncertainty is you have to be patient too. The conventional grey infrastructure approaches to coastal protection are instantaneous. Once, well, in the project lifetime, once it's built, your seawall is made or your rock armor is inserted. Nature-based solutions take time. I'm going to show you some examples of coastal interventions using a coastal community I work with, and they're well able to talk for themselves, and they have, and they do. They're a fantastic community that myself and Kevin started working there in 2015 in the Maharees in the Dingle Peninsula on an OPW-funded experiment to look at beach dune system response recovery to storms. I, I can see the time here is running out, so I need to speed up. When we went down there, it quickly became clear to us that they've chronic coastal erosion happening. And so the dune line is retreating in the space of 120 years, approximately 70 meters is the measurement we came up with. And so it's not quite, but it's nearly a meter a year in the most recent years. And the coastal community knew this, and they've documented this, and they've written letters like this one to the local councils, but never really got much, never made headway into it. And you can see here a drainage block that was built in I think it's 1978, built at it came out at the dune face when it was built. Is now you can see it's in the middle of the beach. So the whole system, and we did some basic map analysis, and we could see the rates of erosion from over the time periods. The most accurate map, the oldest, most accurate map is 1975. And so the rates of erosion are like 0.75 meters per year on average. And what's happening is this whole dune line is retreating. In the normal turn of events, you'd have a beach system like this. A storm comes in, removes the sand during the winter months, but during the summer months it recovers, and the system is pretty much stable. The sand moves back and forth across the system. But we know that wasn't happening here. The whole system was retreating. They also had an issue in terms of, that's pressures from the seaward side. They also had pressures from the landward side, which is basically people camping and using the dunes and using them for all sorts of activities, illegal camping, parties, and just destroying what is essentially people, it's private land too, it's commonage, it's the local dunes, but zero respect. And so I call it like a Pyrrhic victory. It's a gorgeous natural landscape, and because of the beauty and because it's so close, it's basically it's ocean based as well. It attracts a lot. It attracts all people in society. So in 2016, they had a public meeting, and I so happened to give a talk on an update on our coastal project then, and the room was packed. And that night, they formed the Marquis Conservation Association. And so the group, they've had enough. And so I gave them some ideas in terms of where they could go, but that didn't quite work in terms of slide transition. But they mobilized that night, and I helped document some of their actions. And since they formed February 2016 to January 2020, they've done 315 actions. What does that mean? It means they've really embraced nature-based solutions. That's what we're going to talk about, which is they've done marram grass planting, sand trap fencing, straw bales, Christmas trees. But it's very important as a coastal community, you need to understand that nature-based solutions don't work by themselves, I think. They have to be part of a bigger picture, which is signage, enforcement, access fencing, and you have to embrace biodiversity and heritage in terms of education and awareness and outreach. It's all part of actually taking control of your coastal landscape. So what did they do? I do want to bring to attention, besides nature-based solutions, what kind of things did they do? They put signs up in terms of what are the sand dunes, what are the species in there, why are they important? The sense of identity of the place is important. The Natterjack Toe, the townland names, they took them back. What was a water, what was becoming dominantly water-based, the names started changing over time to surf names or water sport names of the locations. But I guess the community also recognizes they wanted to retain their culture, so they put up, and all these things that you see here all take money, all take energy, all take ideas, take proposals, take phone calls, emails. We need more support from local authorities to step up and allow communities to do all this. So let's have a look at some of their interventions. So look at the blowout growth here. The first thing they did was this area is was used as a car park. It's a main access point to the beach in this area. So essentially they cut it off using barriers and fences and straw bales. They also put up signs, and it's funny how the signs changed over time from really strong, don't do something, to more welcoming and informational. So this is one of the first things they did in that location. And this is well documented. International best practice will show you the role of fencing and how it can actually control people, which ultimately lessens the impact on your dune system. So they also had blowouts being redeveloped along the dunes. And this is an example here. This is an old blowout that was becoming redeveloped because as the shoreline retreats, it gets exposed. And if the shoreline gets in here, it just means essentially that this whole blowout will become part of the beach, which means you've nothing left. You can see the elevation drops down to road level really quickly. This is one road in, one road out of the Maharees. And so what they did was just use nature-based solutions again, community-driven, community-funded, straw bales, put them and block up the blowholes, and Christmas trees as well. The Christmas trees one is interesting. We can talk about it after. We're not quite sure of the ecological impact of Christmas trees. I got evidence recently from colleagues in the UK saying some communities have stopped using them because of the ecological impact, because they're stripped down and what's left is sticks, pointy sticks. But again, we can talk about that after. But this worked. That's the bottom line. Besides the old blowouts, there's also newer blowouts being washed out from storms, and so you can storms and people, I should say. It's not. You can see here. There's this is a path that basically people shouldn't be accessing here, but they were. This is all commonage, private land essentially, but people are just accessing it as needed, and so a blowout developed and got bigger over time, and so this makes the whole dune system and the role behind it very vulnerable. So this is this area in 2015 with no vegetation. And then you can see here, June 2016, they did planting. And you can see in June, this picture is taken June 2016. You can see the green here is the planting. Now, to any coastal community in Ireland listening in tonight, if you want to know about planting, you talk to Clean Coast. Well, you should also talk to the communities who've done it too, but the people who will resource you and train you and go down and show you how to do it are a fantastic crew in Clean Coast, and Tashkent Clean Coast, and online they have the manuals. So does it work? Well, this is 1 month later, you can see the vegetation. 12 months later, now they've closed off this part. So the people used to park here and walk up here and access the beach. So now it's closed off. And they'll also put straw bales there 12 months later. 19 months later, you can see they're starting to infill. Same here, they did planting on the backside here. 19 months later, 20 months later. Now this gives you a really better idea. 28 months later, they've also fenced it off at this stage, so people will not access this area. You can see the blowout is raising in elevation. It's becoming a sand. It's a net gain of sediment because of the vegetation that was planted. October, Storm Epsilon, I was down there last October, plus 32 months later, you can see how high it is. It's over time, it will probably rejoin the old position, the dune, signage, fencing. And this is a nice picture of Storm Epsilon. You can see this vegetation is dense enough where it's acting like the rest of the foredune is just being blown over, which makes it resilient to the wind. It's a very tolerant, Marum grass is very tolerant to storms. I also want to bring to your attention, during Storm Epsilon, the community took down fencing along here. This part was left up, but all this requires work. All this was done by the community, the planting, the fencing, and they had different groups involved in this. And so it doesn't happen by itself. It takes a massive amount of hours. And this is the backside. You can see they've also planted the backside of it. Too much sand is another issue, which is this is the road, the the blowout I just showed you is actually here. And this is in this road in 2015-16. This is the only road in and out of the Mahree. It was impassable 17 times because this is a preferred transport pathway of sand. You can see here, cars can't get through it, so people can't go to work, kids can't go to school. More importantly, an emergency vehicle can't get down there. So the local community is very concerned about it. And they asked for interventions, but Kerry County Council was reticent to do anything because they said it's a special area conservation. So it was the MPWS. And MPWS, their kind of approach was non-communicative. And so this became a point of contention by the community. So what we actually did was in October 2016, we brought MPWS Kerry County Council to the dunes and we explained the issues. And this is probably an important thing for a lot of coastal communities in Ireland, which is how do we actually overcome the SAC status? Well, if health and safety are at risk, all bets are off. And that's very important. If health and safety of people is at risk, then interventions are more likely to happen. You could also put it down as site management. And then this is the ins and outs of the Natura 2000 and whether or not appropriate assessment is required. But if it's site management, it's not. And so you could actually put this down as site management. And also we explained, because we work in coastal geomorphology, you could explain dune dynamics, how a temporary fences might actually help, will not be detrimental to the dune health. Then we actually had Kerry County Council, again, fantastic people in there supporting the community with €5,000 to get fencing. And then the local people said, we'll install them. In April 2017, they did. And so 3 dune lines, all just over 50 meters were put in there, you can see here. And the road has not been blocked since. So this 17 times it was blocked one winter and hasn't been blocked since. And they've in fact had to raise the most seaward fence has been raised twice. In fact, last time it was buried so much, they just had to put fencing on top of it. I'm very cognizant of the time, so I'm going to go to this is probably important for some other communities too, which is invasive species. Ironically, the Kerry County Council planted sea buckthorn, and the UK and Ireland, this was very popular for blowouts or for bare sand areas to stabilize dunes. They planted sea buckthorn. It's an invasive species and it's growing in the Maharees. This is the way into the Maharees. On top of the dunes here, you can see a study done in IT Tralee showed that it's actually spreading really rapidly at 27% per year. And this is not insignificant. This is shrubs that are up to 3 meters high. And so you can imagine that's a huge job that can't be avoided. All right. So nature-based solutions, I'm going to start wrapping it up here, and there's a lot more I want to talk about, but there is uncertainty about the performance and costs. In Ireland, there's no funding schemes, and we're actually just replicating a lot of international examples where and there's no reason why we can't change this. There's no specific, we should have specific funding schemes, because these solutions, longer lifespan, lower maintenance costs. Right now, you have to understand that these communities can't it's not sustainable to keep looking for money every time they want to do interventions. There has to be designated money. And then who pays, operates, and maintains it? Right now, our whole coastlines, coastal communities who are doing the sole responsibility of, and land requirements, you need landowners. In our country, in Ireland, God love us, we have no enforcement of plans. And I wish there was plans, because there's actually not even plans of coastal management in Ireland. An island nation, and yet we've no coastal management strategy as a nation. So this is the Maharees. This is an area, special area conservation, this whole dune, and look at it, this is every summer. It's treated like a car park. And it's breaking every rule. And you wonder why 91% of our habitats have unfavorable or bad status. And the locals don't have any support. and it's not fair. This is land that's actually privately owned, and the local community have tried their best to get people off it by explaining it, but that's not their job. And yet that's what they're forced to do every summer. This needs to change. I'm going to wrap it up with one last slide, even though I have 28 more, but maybe we'll touch them in the questions. And this is something I can share as well, maybe in a document I can give to David on the Carroll. Nature-based solutions in Ireland don't just happen by themselves. It's a process. And I'm happy to talk about how communities organize is very important, and how their coastline is changing. Is it from storms, or is it from people? And then citizen science, I think, is going to become more and more important. Citizens, the local communities have the ability, they have the expertise if they're given the funding. And the last slide is two things are happening right now. Maybe they'll get off the ground, but these are two initiatives. One is being driven by the Maharis community, and it's a very simple concept. There's more power if there's more coastal communities together in it, they have more probability that they'll make impact in Dublin, in the offices that need to make these changes. And so who knows where this will go, but the first meeting has been done, and there is some enthusiasm where 22 communities met. Who knows how many of them will go forward this, but an alliance of Irish communities in crisis. This alliance could be key to unlocking resources for coastal communities. If they all have the same problems, if they've done a survey, it's not mine to share, I've seen the results. Every community has the same very similar problems. We know the solutions to these problems, they just need the resources and the support of local authorities who depend on the big government. And the second one is led by the Carroll here, who I'm hosted by in Mayo, but basically representing the northern seaboard of Ireland, which is, there should be an information hub. We can all learn together. And so I can give you examples here, but the best people to learn from are people who've gone through this, how to make the phone calls, what to ask for. And so one of the things is maybe create a network connecting coastal communities concerned with climate change chaos. 7 Cs, Kevin seems to like that, and it's definitely impactful. But what would it be? It would be all the information I share with you and more. The details of what I shared with you. How did planting occur? Why did it occur? Videos, documents, just points of contact. That's what we need more of. Essentially an information sharing hub. All right, I think I've gone an hour. I think that's it. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Eugene. Before we open up the floor to all the participants, again, thanks very much for an enlightening talk. For those of you who are familiar with these issues on coastal erosion and some of these communities and how they're dealing with coastal erosion, some pretty sobering words, but there's some hope in there as well. And so hopefully Eugene has passed along that hope to you. I have a couple questions, and I was writing them down in the chat. I think I'll go back to the first question that was asked, and this was a while ago. So maybe Mara O'Brien might go off of mute just if she needs to explain just a little bit more. But she was wondering, she was wondering if beach levels will rise along with sea level rise.
Eugene, Liam, can I just jump in there before you answer that? Can you hit the stop recording button there, please, Liam?
Oh, Liam.